There it is. I got the message. Awesome. Thanks. So currently I oversee functional training for WEX in our health division. I wanted to be specific about that because we do have another team that oversees our leadership development, our talent development, our career pathing, career development, all of that. My role is to oversee functional training. So we're onboarding folks into their specific roles throughout the health division. But my story, because that's what Jay asked me to tell, the story doesn't start there. The story starts way back in 2015 at Discovery Benefits. So WEX acquired Discovery Benefits 3 years ago. So when the story of this onboarding began, and honestly, throughout the first several years of it, I was working at Discovery Benefits. And after I had worked for several HR and L&D roles throughout my career, I then moved into higher education. I did student leadership development and for quite a while, and then really wanted to move back into that fast-paced corporate world. So I took a role as a product trainer at Discovery Benefits. And 6 months later, I then moved into the role of leadership development manager. So I was running all of our leadership development initiatives at the company. And that's when I was working with Lindsay, who's here today. And that was me. At that time, I wasn't really involved too much with onboarding, but onboarding was definitely going on in the company. And here's really what it looked like at that time. It looked like this combination of two things, depending on a little bit about what area you worked in. And some of you will recognize these photos and relate to them as well. So it looked like either I would say fire hose learning. So tell you all the things and then go back to your job and do them. And depending on what area of the company you worked in, a lot of side-by-side one-on-one training. Needless to say, it wasn't extremely effective. It could have been better, but it's what we had. It did the job. At the time, the company, Discovery Benefits, was also experiencing this extremely rapid growth. In fact, we tripled in size over the course of 3 years. So that meant if there's that many new folks coming into the company, just for growth, that doesn't account for attrition. That means we're onboarding a ton of folks. And the onboarding was done like this. There were some courses, there was lots of one-on-one, but everyone who was doing training had been somebody who had been good at their job and became a trainer very organically because they were asked to, hey, Molly's starting. Can she just sit with you because you're good at what you do, Leslie? And Leslie then all of a sudden, because of this rapid growth, is only training in new people. So we just change her title and call her a trainer. But we do know that when subject matter experts train, they do tend to fire hose because everything's important. Practice was minimal. Expense is really large when you're doing a lot of one-on-one training. So it all came to a head when the end of 2016, every department submitted their budget to the CFO, and every department asked for additional trainers. And as you all likely know, headcount is quite expensive, one of the largest expenses that a company can have. So the CFO simply said, nope, too expensive. You got to figure out how to scale this. You need to eliminate duplication. You need to increase efficiency. And after you've done that, come back to me. We'll talk headcount. And at that point, all of a sudden, I got tapped on the shoulder and presented this challenge. The challenge of take all of our onboarding, eliminate duplication, increase efficiency. That's where my story begins. But I'm curious as to where your story begins. You put a few numbers in the chat. I'm going to ask Leslie to quickly put you in some breakouts. She's going to do maybe three, maybe 4 people. So you'll just have a couple folks. If you could introduce yourself and then answer these couple questions. If you're a screenshot person, go ahead, take a screenshot. If you want to make a note, make a note. But where you're at right now, what's the current state of onboarding in your company, and where's your area of biggest opportunity when it comes to onboarding? So those are your 2 questions. Introduce yourself. What's the state of onboarding in your company? Where is your area of biggest onboarding opportunity? And Leslie, we can go ahead and send people to breakouts. You'll be in your breakout for about 8 minutes. Well, welcome back, everyone. And Leslie had asked that as everyone comes back, if you could please mute yourself, because you may not come back in on mute. So thank you for participating in that brief breakout rooms. I know they always go pretty quick. So I'd like to know, just in chat, what is the current state of onboarding in your company? If you can real quickly put in there, what is it, so we can get an idea of where most people are at. I know you did the ranking before, so maybe a little bit more info. Continuous customization chaos. I see, starting to come in. Regulatory versus experience. Good company overview, team level lacking. Good to know. Looking to overhaul, growing need, overwhelmed, segmented, slowed with COVID. Fire hose, not centralized. Role-based. Fire hose, inconsistent, SME-led, high turnover. Yep. In transition. Some fire hose, some OJT. Good. A new employee experience, virtual team. In the process of centralizing, thanks to Mark. Getting beyond the first week. Different depending on the area, of course, and internal versus external hires. Yep. Buy-in from business leaders. Got it. Well, great. Looks like we are all over the place, but anything that you put in here to me is not uncommon. So I do stay pretty active in the network, in my network, in the community of L&D, and have these kind of conversations frequently. And most of what you're talking about, I think, does get brought up very frequently. So I'll go ahead and tell the story of how we got to where we are and what it looks like now. And hopefully this will help give you a few ideas that you can take away and potentially implement in your own organizations. So as I said earlier, my challenge, there we go. My slide wasn't advancing. My challenge was to eliminate duplication and increase efficiency across all of the onboarding, across all of our functional business units at Discovery Benefits, which now is the health division, a large part of the health division of WEX. So what we did through our story, what we were able to do was reduce duplication in training across the organization by 86%. We had a 50% reduction in time to onboard. So onboarding that was taking 5 to 8 weeks minimum to get somebody up and running in their role now takes 2 to 3 or 4 weeks. And we essentially ended up doing more with less staff because we got that efficient. Couple things that I want to say before I continue to tell you the story of how we got there is, number one, I didn't do this alone. I have a rock star team. I feel very, very blessed to work with the folks that I work with who are high talent and they work hard. And so this was definitely a team effort. And the second thing I want to say is that this did not happen quickly. The bulk of the work took, I would say, 3 years, and we started 5 years ago. We are still working on improving. And so it's not a quick turnaround, snap your fingers. And I mean, I'm still waiting for my magic wand. It hasn't arrived yet, but it's not a magic wand type approach. Takes a while to get there. So how did we get there? Well, when I look back, I was trying to think of the best way to tell this story, and I could really break it down into, I would say, 7 different areas, and I'll go through each one in detail, one at a time, with a few examples and ideas that you can use if you want to use any of these particular areas. And I will say that these areas did not happen one at a time. A lot of them were happening simultaneously. So here's my 7 areas, is that we centralized the functional training. We simplified the vision with a formula that was repeatable so that no matter what part of the company somebody was working in, we use this same formula in order to apply their particular area that they need to learn about. We created buy-in with stakeholders, restructured and reskilled our own training and learning team, focused on frequency and volume. We worked on eliminating duplication, of course, as I talked about in the content, and we still allowed for some nuance between departments. So I'll go through a little bit about what each of these look like. So first of all, we started with centralizing the training, functional training function. We started with centralizing functional training. This was the very first wheel that we set in motion. So any of those with a trainer title were moved to report up through me. And all of a sudden I had 27 direct reports from all over the company. So here's what it looked like before we centralized. We basically had this is a simplified version, but we had our COO, each department SVP or VP reported up to that person. There was a department leader or two or few, depending on the size of the department. Then that and reporting up through that department leader were the team and the trainers for that particular area, who were people that were subject matter experts on that team. After the centralization, it looked much like this. We had a shared services senior vice president who was named, who now oversees things like content, change management, project management, and functional training. And then a learning department VP who was me. And then all of the trainers who had been on separate teams came and reported up in the same space. Now we did that for a couple reasons. We did that because we needed to wrap our heads around all of the training that was happening across the company, what was going on, because we were going to eliminate duplication and get more efficient. We just had to know what we were dealing with. We needed a central oversight that would allow for some common vision in moving this project forward. And really, we needed to create experts in learning, not just experts in the subject matter at that point. So that we could be following learning principles, adult learning principles, and do learning in a way that was effective for everyone involved. So that was step one. Now the rest of what I'm going to talk about happened mostly simultaneously. But the next thing that I would say is that we needed a vision. So we were able to simplify this down to, like I said, I talked about a formula. Now, one of the things I really love is taking the big picture and breaking it down into workable next steps. You might say strategy is kind of my jam. So simplifying a big picture strategy was really fun for me. And to get to the formula that I'll share with you, I'll break it down with a few key thoughts that help to get us there. The very first change that we made was going to a flipped classroom model. So the flipped classroom model, this visual I used with a lot of our stakeholders as I was trying to explain what that was, because part of what simplifying down to a formula and what getting more efficient meant was using our time more efficiently. And the one-to-one model we had was very expensive, and I was not convinced that the classroom that we were doing was being done well. And to me, it really comes down to how do we maximize every modality that we use, especially for scale and reduction in time or reduction in duplication. So for example, let's not do something in a classroom that someone could do by themselves. So if all we're going to do is read through a PowerPoint deck for hours at a time, let's not spend classroom time doing that. If we're going to have people in a room being led by a facilitator, let's make sure they're doing things in that room that are collaborative and interactive and hands-on, and the things that a facilitator can guide them in. So this flipped classroom blended learning approach, we took anything that could be considered a lecture style and knew that that needed to move online, so that in the classroom, we could do what we could do only in the classroom, making it interactive, learning together, making sure the facilitator is actually more passive and less active, so that the learners, the people in there, are doing active learning. Now, one of the stories that I used most frequently to explain this actually came from one of our managers. And she said at the time she had a son who was in high school. And he came home one day and said, "Mom, I'm going to do my homework." He went downstairs. He said, "I'm doing my math homework," went downstairs to do his math homework. And she walked downstairs and he was watching a video. And she said, "What are you doing? I thought you were doing your math homework." And he said, "This is my math homework." So that teacher was using the flipped classroom approach, where they gave the math information in a video, and this has become much more common now with COVID. This was all for us happening way back in 2016, 2017-ish. And then when he went to the class the next day, he did what was traditionally called the homework. Now, why did that work? Because when do you have the most questions? Do you have questions when somebody is telling you the information, or do you have more questions when you start to try to do and play with the information yourself? That was the model then that we went with, and that was how we explained it to our stakeholders so they could get a better understanding of what we were going for. The other thing this flipped classroom blended learning approach did for us was allowed for a lot more individual review. When you have someone at the front of the room speaking, I mean, you basically got one chance to grab the information if you're a good note taker. Before, we had a lot of ways to record. And so this way, with that key information online, I can go back and review it at any time. And our participants would ask more impactful questions simply because in that lab style environment, in that classroom was so active that was when they had the questions. So that's a little bit about that story. The next thing that we needed to do was chunk out the information. So a lot of you talked about fire hose. Fire hose was something that we were looking at as well. And what it was all the topics all at once in what I would call one sequence of learning. And then boom, you're shot into full production, go. What we did instead was reorganize all of that onboarding across the company to look more like this. So we took the onboarding and we broke it down into topics, key topics that folks needed to learn. And within each of those key topics, there were tasks that they needed to learn. And we called each of those topics a sequence. Basically, instead of learning everything all at once and then being boom, shot into full production, you would learn one topic, one sequence of tasks, and then you would go into production, come back to the onboarding group, the training group for their next topic, and then go into production and practice that. You then practice number 3 and so on and so on. What this allowed was a number of different things. It made it easier to learn and build on each topic by practicing and using those skills a little bit of time in between. It improved the confidence of those who were learning because they could learn one thing, they could practice it, and then when they went back to their next thing, they were able to build on that. But then magic even happened when they went into production for the second time. Every time you go into production, you're a little bit nervous and it's uncomfortable, it's unfamiliar, but you would still get those questions that came in from topic 1, and you'd have these moments of, oh, maybe I can do this job. The other thing is folks were able to contribute right away. So this was helpful for teams and it was helpful for the new hires. For the teams, they got folks into production right away. I mean, in our call center, we have folks now into production within day 4. Within our 4th day, and it used to be after 5 weeks. So within the 4th day, they've learned task 1, they're in the call center, they're on the phones, they're taking calls. They are able to contribute to the production right away to help the team. And I'm going to talk about onboarding in a little bit, but not onboarding, sorry, I'm going to talk about buy-in next. And this was a key for buy-in, was you will get your folks in right away and they'll be participating in production. And then learning just stuck more. And our new hires were able to contribute right away. They didn't have to wait for 8 weeks. When you're hired in a company, you don't want to wait and wait and wait. You want to start doing your job right away. Nobody loves to be stuck in training for a long period of time. So that was that chunk. So we took the flipped model and this chunking, and then here's what we did. Each task within a sequence had this particular formula. And this is what we repeat over and over and over again. And I call it 1, 2, 3. The 1, 2, 3 formula looks like this. Number 1 is an e-learning or a video. So this is with any task within a sequence. You have an e-learning or a video about that particular task. It's self-led. You do it by yourself. However, we do schedule the time for these in the new hire onboarding schedule so that they know that's what they need to be doing at any given time, and they do get it done. Then step number 2, you come into an interactive, what we call a lab style or a lab facilitator-led course, where you are practicing, you are playing whatever that task was that you got the basic information with, you are now playing with it and practicing it with a facilitator leading you over and over again in a number of different ways. Now, this looks different depending on what the particular task is. If we are talking just our basic product and you need to learn what our basic product is and explain what that is, which may be like, for example, a health savings account, you maybe watch a video or an e-learning about a health savings account. And then because it's very product driven, your first task is to play with what does it look for you to have a health savings account? How do you make decisions about your health savings account? There may be more than one lab style facilitator led course, depending on how in depth you need to go. So we do this because this allows us to scale across the business. We have everybody potentially in that first lab style course to, for example, talk about how do I use a health savings account and how does what I learn relate to my life. And then the next piece would be, all right, now we're going to go a little bit deeper in what kinds of, for again, the call center, what kinds of calls are going to come in asking questions about HSAs and how do we, and where do we find the answers for those? So that would be the second type of lab. Step number 3 we found was critical. We started with just step number 1 and step number 2. Step number 3 is structured on the job training with the team. So in order for this to be effective, we take each task within a sequence. You learn about it on a video, then you go into a lab course, and our labs, by the way, are now all virtual. There are no in-person courses any longer that we train, and we never will train in person again. It is all virtual. It is all highly interactive. It is all facilitator led. You do that for a few times. You're practicing with others, and then your third piece is whatever that task is you just learned, now you go to the team and you're practicing and shadowing and working with somebody on the team to do the next level of that particular task. And then we just repeat with the next task. So each sequence, we do 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So it becomes this dance. No longer do we hold people in a classroom for weeks at a time. We hold them in a classroom for a short period of time. First they do self-learning. We have them in a classroom a short period of time. Then they go to the job and they're doing whatever that task is. And then boom, back again, back again, back again. So that's our formula, our 1, 2, 3 formula within this flipped learning, blended learning, and chunked out model. And I see somebody here put 70, 20, 10. Exactly. It is very much a 70, 20, 10 type approach. And did we have issues with leadership not wanting to put people back into production during training? Yes, but here's the other thing that we learned is that as people did this sequence, we had that at the beginning, but each sequence they could learn faster. Because so instead of going through training for 5 weeks, they're learning one task, and then we're just building on that when they come back for the next sequence. So it takes less time because they already know how to navigate in the system. They already know, for example, how to take a phone call. They already know basic customer service. They already know all these things that we don't have to go back and do. So coming back, each sequence actually gets a little bit shorter. And so it's less time. And then when they go back on the job, they're able to do more and more at a time. So that is our formula that we used. And then the next step is that we needed to create buy-in with stakeholders. So we've got a great formula, which is great, but a lot of you are already one step ahead. You're asking, how do you reach these how do you get buy-in from the different stakeholders across the business? And that was definitely something we needed to do because this is a new model for all of them. You know, most of those folks who do not work in the world that we work in don't spend each and every day thinking about how to make learning more effective. And I will say that our education system doesn't do us any favors in this regard because we grow up thinking the best way to learn is from somebody in front of a room. That's how it works. And business stakeholders tend to think that way then. They're not thinking about, are there more creative ways to do this? Are there other ways to do it? They're not thinking strategically about effective learning. They're not asking how we can make it more efficient other than, can you just speed up the classroom? They're thinking about how it's always been done. So our job is to share with them how this is different and how it works. And that is something that I am really, 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 really passionate about. And I love this buy-in part. To me, this is the most fun. in second to strategy, probably. Strategy and buy-in are kind of my jam. So I love to do those kinds of things. So how did we create buy-in with stakeholders? Well, first of all, we need to become trusted business advisors, not just necessarily order takers. So one of my mantras about learning and development is that this work is not about us. We can't start there. We can't start by walking in with stakeholders into a room with stakeholders and saying, this is what we're going to do. Here's the plan. We can't start there. We won't build trust that way, and trust and influence really go hand in hand. The very first step is to start by learning about the leaders and learning about their business. And then we can talk the language of their business and talk about what solutions we're proposing work with what their own challenges and successes are. I have a little model that I use. I found this really helpful years ago, where you can put two things on a grid and you can determine whether or not you have achieved trusted business advisor status with any given stakeholder. So on these two lines, one side is relationships and the other is business credibility. When I'm talking about relationships on this axis, I'm talking about knowing them. How well do I know them and do they know me? So I don't necessarily need to be BFFs with them, but I want them to know who I am, and I want to know who they are and maybe a little bit about them. So we've got some kind of a relationship built. Business credibility is not necessarily about me. Again, this is about them. What are their goals? What are their challenges? What are pressures are they under? What are their successes? What's their business cadence? When are they most busy? When are they most stressed? If I can understand this information about them, I can build trust much more quickly. So what I can do with this particular these two axes is put these on a grid where strong is towards the end and weak is in the bottom. And I can make quadrants. And I want to get all of my business relationships with stakeholders to be in this quadrant where I know them, they know me, and I have a really good understanding of their goals, challenges, pressures, successes. And we have conversations about that when I meet with them. What I find works really well for this, and this is what I did when I started at Discovery Benefits, is what I call a learning tour, where I sat with each of the business stakeholders, even just for 30 minutes, and said, hey, I'm here to learn. Tell me about your business. And I had some very specific questions I asked. Tell me about your cadence. Tell me about your challenges. Tell me about your goals. Tell me about your pressures that you're under, to try to understand them. I also think it's really important to watch the stats that come out from their business units. So I'm constantly watching all of the reporting that comes out about how each business unit is doing, where their big challenges are. So a combination of gathering their documentation and then also asking them questions. I do with those that I meet that we have to work with their areas the most closely. Meet with them on a regular basis. I would say some of them it's quarterly, some it's monthly, some it's weekly. It just depends on how often we're interacting with them. Now, luckily, I had already done this when I started at the company, even as a corporate trainer. And so I felt like I had a great place to begin. I already had trusted business advisor status with many of these folks. And if I didn't, I knew if I needed to increase my business credibility or my relationship with them based on this particular model. So that is the first step that I always take when I'm trying to create buy-in, is even just, what is it about them? Let me learn about their business. And again, one of the biggest mistakes I think L&D we make overall is we don't know enough about the business. We're trying to do things for them, not with them. Second thing is we needed to, in this big change, have a CVO, a Chief Vision Officer. And that's in quotes because it really isn't a real position. It's just who is going to be the person that is going to carry the message over and over and over again, because it isn't enough to tell them just once. It's telling the story, sharing the vision. It's a continuous job, like a drippy faucet. Over and over again, I'm dripping the same message on them. And this was, again, one of my primary roles in this overall change, was to be this creating buy-in and be this Chief Vision Officer. The one thing that I learned along the way that was really helpful was to use their language and not ours. So when you're going to talk with business stakeholders, don't talk about learning outcomes, rubrics, level 3 evaluation, all of these these terms that really are unique to us in our industry, we want to use the terms that they use. And I'll give you a good example of this. So when I was working with one particular area about talking about this structured shadowing, the number 3 in the 1, 2, the structured on the job training, the number 3 in the 1, 2, 3 model, I was talking with them about, all right, here's our next step is we need to have them come back and we'll help you organize it so that the folks who are coming from the onboarding are going to be seen and working on the tasks that they have just learned so they can connect the dots. And I had this area say, oh, no. Structured on the job training, we don't have time to do that. You've got to do all that. We don't have time to do that. And then I said, and I was thinking in my head, well, wait a minute, they already do this. And they did. They just called it shadowing. They didn't call it training. And so instead of calling it structured on the job training with this particular group, we now call it structured shadowing. So when I came back and said, again, I said, I've been thinking about what you told me. And really what I think we can do to help you with some consistency and to help your new hires connect the dots more quickly is help you by structuring that shadowing time a little bit more, creating some checklists that you can go through with these folks so they can see exactly how to connect the dots. But again, that was their term. That wasn't my term. It's now become our term. As you saw, I even switched it up in my head a little bit when I was explaining it. It's really structured on the job training, but by calling it structured shadowing, we got buy-in from this group right away. So use their language, don't use ours. And if we use their language, it helps them to buy in even that much more quickly. It doesn't really matter what we call it as long as the outcome is the same. The third thing that I always do when we create buy-in with stakeholders is go where the energy is. So start with those who are willing. And some of you, I've been kind of watching the questions as they've come up, but even about how do you build buy-in, where do you start? I always start with go where the energy is. We had multiple areas that we were working with across the organization that we were trying to get on board with this new strategy of how we wanted to do onboarding. There is always one area that is more excited about it than any others. And I'm not saying that just in my organization. I mean, in general, when we're creating change, somebody's interest is more piqued for whatever reason. That is where you start. So I start where the energy is. In our case, it was with our call center. They were very willing to look at this and think about how they could get people into production faster, because we did end up cutting back from 5 weeks of training to about overall, they come back and forth a few times. And now overall, I would say it's maybe 3, a little less depending on. And then what we did, we started there, we built momentum, and then we just kept telling the story. So for example, I had one business unit that really was skeptical on this whole idea and didn't really understand how it could work. They thought that their fire hose method was the best, and why couldn't we just do it that way? And after a while with the call center, we started to notice some wins where, like the confidence building, the decrease in time and training, the efficiencies we were gaining. And I started to tell those stories to this other area. And wouldn't you know that all of a sudden, one day that area came back to me and said, hey, you know what you've been doing with the call center and how they're able to get people into production sooner? I was wondering if we could try that in our area as well. See, nobody wants to be left behind. So competitively across the organization, if somebody else is doing something awesome, they want to be doing that same awesome thing. And so I always start with go where the energy is, building momentum through small wins, and just keep on telling the story. The next thing that we needed to do was restructure and reskill the learning team. So as you recall, I inherited a number of subject matter experts, a large number across the organization. There were, in fact, 27 of them in all. And here's what it looked like when I first inherited them. We had a few managers, and then we had all the trainers. And the trainers were doing all the things. So they were creating training, they were facilitating training, and we quickly realized that not everybody loves all the things and not everybody is good at all the things. And so we restructured the team to look more like this, where we had a manager of designers, and we had a manager of facilitators and then we had our facilitators. So people were either focused in on those lab style courses and facilitating those really well, or they were focused in on creating and designing the structured on the job training, or the e-learnings or the videos or whatever that would be. So we grouped the team out that way. But then the next thing we needed to do was develop them as subject matter experts in learning, not as subject matter experts in the business. And this was challenging. This was challenging because not everybody wants to be a facilitator of learning. They loved their subject matter expert job in a lot of instances. They like to be the answer giver. So what we did, again, this was a multi-year process. I simply tried to increase the maturity about learning and the learning expertise of the team through small goals each and every year. Now this slide has a lot on it, but I wanted you to have an idea of how incremental these changes were. So the very first year we were just creating and casting vision. The training was done basically the same. As we started to make changes, we asked each facilitator and designer to figure out how could you decrease classroom time and do the same types of things. How can you increase the interactivity in your classroom, in your lab style, or in an e-learning. When you design an e-learning, we don't just want a PowerPoint. We want something that they're going to have to interact with the information and click around and think and play a game. And then we want each e-learning to have a classroom lab that follows that. What might that look like? So we had the team working together on those things. Of course, we had to, in team meetings, in one-on-ones, we did book reads together. We shared articles about just amping up their knowledge about learning as a field. In the next year, I challenged them to, okay, now you've made these courses a little more interactive. How can you get more hands-on practice? That's the next increment. And how do we tie that to structured on the job training? How do we write objectives? I want you to now write an objective for every single experience or learning that they're doing. The next year, now the challenge is, all right, you've got interactivity. And this year, by the way, was when we started to go virtual, and virtual best practices infuse interaction every 4 to 6 minutes. So that was the next challenge. Now you are all doing your lab style trainings online, virtually. There, you need to have interaction with those trainees, something that they have to do every 4 to 6 minutes at the minimum. You can't talk longer than that. We also need you to include formal or informal assessment in each experience so that you know if they're getting it and we know if they're getting it and we know if it's working. And we continue to structure on the job training. Year 5, which is where we're at now, and I'll talk more about this later in terms of what we are doing next, because this is a journey and we're still on it. We reorganized our learning into clusters by topic. And finished tying in structured on the job training. So it was very incremental. And I will also say that we lost some people along the way because they did not want to be subject matter experts. They did not want to be experts in learning. They wanted to be subject matter experts. The hardest thing for all of our folks, especially our facilitators, was to stop giving answers right away, to get them to the point where they could essentially stand at the back of the room and guide people instead of just when somebody raises their hand and asks a question, oh, that's right there, go there in the system and you'll see it. It's asking questions to guide that person there instead. Of course, I also had to equip the leaders on the team, those couple different managers, in terms of what learning was. They had a little bit of background, but not a ton. And we did that through book discussions. We did that through conversations. We did that through team meetings. And then as folks left who didn't want to be learning experts, they wanted to be subject matter experts, and we coached them into other areas of the company. We rehired and replaced those people with folks who truly wanted to facilitate learning, not just give answers. So that was how we got folks from subject matter experts to experts in learning, a team full of experts in learning. The next thing that we did is to focus on frequency and volume. And I shouldn't even say the next thing because this was overall part of our strategy. And frequency and volume dictated where we spent the majority of our time. And what I mean by that is we focused on where are we hiring the most people and where can we have the biggest impact. So when we we started creating e-learning courses, we started with what is the thing that everybody in the company needs to know? The basics about the product. Those are the very first places we're going to start in terms of creating this new structure. So we started with the very basics that everyone needed to know. So not the thing that just one person needed to know, but the thing that everybody needed to know. And then as we worked with these different business units, we did the same thing. Which business units, let me say this, our involvement with each business unit depended on the frequency and volume of their hiring. So again, I'll go back to our call center, which hires the most people the most frequently. So they're continuously hiring. We have more folks on our team who are really dedicated to working with the call center. They can do other things, but because of the frequency and volume in that team, they need more support. And then those areas that maybe hire 1, 2, 3 people a year, we don't go as in depth with them, but we do offer support in terms of the basics that everybody needs to know at the company, and then also helping them to structure and organize their own training on their own team. So if they're hiring 1, 2, 3 people a year, we're not necessarily creating and working with them to the same degree as we are with those higher volume areas. We also focused, I call it train to the 80%. So this was also something that was hard for our subject matter experts at first. And then it is also hard when we're working with the business units who are subject matter experts to break down to this level. I want to focus on us training folks to the things that they need to know each and every day in their job and that they're encountering very regularly. If it is a question that comes in, once every 6 months, we are not going to focus on that on new hire training. And for those of you who work in learning and development, this is maybe somewhat of a duh to you. Like, we're not going to tell you that because you probably won't encounter it for 5 months and you're not going to remember it 5 months from now. But this was difficult with subject matter experts because they want everyone to know everything like they do. And our new hires will get there, but we want to focus on when they are a new hire, training them to the 80% of what are the things they're going to encounter all the time, and then where are the resources that they can use to find the answers when they don't know them. So those are that's the frequency and volume conversations that we were having over and over again. 6, we were eliminating training duplication. As I talked about, that was one of our key initiatives earlier. And I call this the Where's Waldo jigsaw puzzle, because there was so much training happening across the company. And it was like, well, where are the duplicate Waldos? And how do they all fit together? And we've got great people on our staff who were able to break things down and structure and reschedule so that folks start out the training all together and then they gradually funnel down to be more individualized in their different roles. But here's a few things that we did that I think were very key. One was listing all the content, which was a big project. So what's all the training that's being done in one location, one spreadsheet? We used Airtable at the time. I think now if we were to do it over, we now have access to Google Sheets, or we could even have done it in an Excel document. But where's all that content? And then we tagged it for what was covered in each of those content so that then we could do a broad search and find where was the duplication happening across all of our content. It was a big project. Another strategy that we used, and this was when we were back in the office, we're all now virtual, but we made an intentional decision to seat our facilitators together who were training different courses. So if somebody is training mainly call center and somebody else is training mainly our data entry folks, we sat them together so that they would hopefully talk a little bit about the different training that they were doing, or at least overhear conversations that each other was having. And then we did have team meetings where we got together and talked through specific topics to say, what courses are you teaching that cover this and how do you do it? That was also a big project. And then we had our facilitators attend each other's courses. And what that did was it helped them to find out and pick up key ideas for facilitating their own courses, but they also identified duplication that way. Hey, wait a minute, we train on that too. Let's talk about that. So we did have the whole team knew that our big goal was to eliminate duplication. And those are some of the strategies that we used. The seventh thing in terms of us creating this entire onboarding program is that we had to allow for nuance between departments. So even though we have our formula, our 1, 2, 3 formula, and we all work for the same company, we're like different shades of the same apple, to use this visual, where one person's doing data entry, one person's doing account management, one person's doing call center, one person's doing accounting. There's similarities and differences. And so the way we work with each of our different departments, each of our different business units follows the same formula, but it is a slightly different approach. And it's based on the tasks that that area needs to learn and the nature of the work, as well as the frequency and volume. So we do have a nuanced approach to working with each area, and that is, it's exciting, it's challenging, it allows us to be creative in the way that we work with each area, but we still use the same framework. And so that is, that's something that we do. If we could start over and do this over, if I look back 5 years ago and think, what would I have done differently? I would have better benchmark measurements, better progress tracking, better reporting from the beginning. We have some pretty standard measurements, like how much does it cost to train someone? How long does it take? Those kinds of things. But I would have done better tracking performance-wise to the role itself. That's something now we're going back and working on again. So are we improving performance across the team, for example? But it's always easier to do measurement from the beginning than it is to go back. So that's something that I would say we're learning the hard way. And that if we could start over, that was some of the things we do. I do want to allow folks to chat again in a breakout room about what their key takeaway is and what they'd like to implement. However, before we do that, I am able to, let's take a question or two that seems like it would be relevant. Leslie, what is a question or two that I can answer for a few minutes before we have folks go into breakouts?
Sure,
Actually,
so go ahead, Jay.
I was going to say Vicki had one. Vicki knows.
Okay.
Vicki, will you come off of mute and ask your question?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. This was a great presentation. I'm curious. I oversee a clinical orientation, so just to give you some context. So I'm curious what your perspective is on how you adapt this for off cycles. Obviously, here in the clinical world, we have a lot of turnover with nurses, especially. So I was just curious, is this adaptable to an off cycle, especially when you have several departments involved, IT, applications, clinical, I'm curious how you mitigate that. That's
an excellent question. And that is something that we had to work with when we started the entire overhaul as well, is an off cycle hire. We got on the same page with HR, what we did, and we identified a hiring cycle that would work. So I will say that off cycle, if we have it now, is really, really difficult. And it almost needs what has to come out quite often or go out of order is those facilitated lab sessions. We can do the structured shadowing. The structured shadowing, structured on the job training can be kind of, can be adjusted. The e-learnings and videos obviously can be adjusted, but because those facilitated sessions happen at specific times, those generally cannot. And the way that our onboarding now works with so many different departments is it really is a puzzle where if you remove, almost like a Jenga game, if you remove one piece, all the other pieces have to move around too. And so we were doing hiring kind of at any moment when we first started. And now it's every other week is when a new hire group comes in. Once in a while, we have a team that says we're going to hire off cycle. And we say, all right, well, here's what we can do. And we can provide these things. However, if this person is able to wait 4 more days to start, we can get them in this process. So I would say to your question, Vicki, it does get trickier. But as an organization gets larger, I think we've just got to have more automated, more processes. And we're big fans of the term, here's what we can do. But if you're able to, then here's what we can do, like giving those different options. What's another question?
Well, I think one of the questions that sort of has been duplicated, so many people would like to know, is how large was the organization that the new team supported, and sort of similar to that, let me see here. How big is your team, trainers and designers per department?
Yep. So we support right now in the health division itself, we support just under 2,000 people. We have now 20 folks on the team. So the team has decreased from the time that we accumulated all of the different trainers from across the organization. And the reason for that is as we got more and more efficient, we didn't need as many people. We never laid anyone off. We just redistributed the head count elsewhere, or there was just natural attrition and we didn't replace that person. Facilitators or trainers per department is a little bit trickier. Facilitators, sorry, or designers per department is a little bit trickier because it isn't necessarily per department. We have facilitators per line of business. So we have two main lines of business. One is benefits, like a flexible spending, health savings account, commuter benefits, type benefits, health benefits. The other is COBRA, so COBRA insurance. So we have folks who train one or the other lines of business, but most of them train across a couple different departments. Because, for example, this trainer is really good at training on files and the ways that files need to integrate. They may train that in more than one area. Also, the departments are different sizes. So where we have the call center, we have trainers who mostly are dedicated to training in the call center for the most part. And though we don't have that in all of the areas, we have maybe one person who is more knowledgeable in that particular area. But yeah, I see, Gary, you're saying one learning specialist per 100. I would say, yeah, that's about right. However, there isn't a staffing metric. That's just where we've landed. We haven't grown the department for many years. We have just become more and more efficient. In fact, we became so effective and efficient with this new model that we could take on more work. And now our designers especially also do customer education. So they create webinars and videos for customers as well as internal employees. And we have, let me just do the math in my head. We have 5 designers. And so the rest are facilitators, 5 designers, 11 facilitators, 2 managers, and a project manager. And if that math doesn't add up, I'm sorry. I was doing it off the top of my head. But we've got 20 folks right now. All right. Hey, Leslie, why don't we have people hop into breakouts? And okay. If the same breakout, if possible, if you have additional questions, a couple things, I'll try to answer a few more when we come back together in 8 minutes again. And then if we don't have time to get to all of them, I have told Jay I'm happy to follow up with answering questions as a follow-up as well, and I'm happy to do that. So I'm going to ask you to, in your same breakouts, talk about really what was your key takeaway? What are you taking away from this that you can use to address your area of onboarding opportunity in your own organization? And if for some reason you hop into your breakout and the other 2 folks or 3 folks that were in there had to jet, because that happens sometimes in our work days, then come back to the main room and we'll reassign you, or we'll have a conversation there as well. All right, Leslie, we're ready to go.
All right, just one moment.
Again here. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm curious as to key takeaways. Would you just note them real quickly in chat? Curious as to what hit you the most through what we talked about for the last hour or so. And while you do that, I will resume sharing my screen. The 1, 2, 3. Yeah, I love that too. It also makes it really easy to explain to other people. They get it when you can break it down into a formula. And the buy-in, oh my gosh, I love buy-in is my favorite. And that was one thing, just as those of you who came back from the breakout, you were maybe hearing the end of a conversation where we were talking about speaking the language of the business. And the very first times I started asking the business for their metrics, they were very confused as to why a learning person would care. And now years later, it's just become the norm. Like I'm watching their metrics. They know that I'll ask them questions about them, and we share our metrics back with them too. And so it's become a different type of conversation. All right, I want to go ahead and just let you know real quickly where we are focusing next, our next steps, where the journey continues. So I'm continuing to upskill the learning team as we mature. And in fact, our focus this year is going to be helping them learn to be more and more consultative in their approach with the different business units. Because our company continues to grow, we, with the success that we've had, have been lucky enough to now be tapped on the shoulder from other business units and other areas to say, can you come help us as well? Or if, as WEX as a whole continues to acquire additional organizations, we've been asked to integrate with those folks and help with their training. And so I'm really working to get the folks on my team, at least those more senior members, to have that consultative approach of asking questions and using this formula and thinking about chunking out and thinking about frequency and volume. And so that's one of that. And that comes right along with project management. As we take on more areas, we are likely not going to have more headcount. I would love to say we would, but you know how learning and development in an organization, it's a different conversation. And so our team needs to continue to be more consultative and help folks create and design and deliver their own initiatives in their own areas more and more. So that's one thing. And working with those additional business units, as I said, we are working on improving our measurement and reporting, specifically how it relates back directly to performance. So those are the metrics that we're working on this year. And then using all the information available. So this is another thing that I can get kind of feisty about is curation versus creation. We have so much information about what we do across the company. We've got webinars, we've got even marketing collateral, sales collateral, we've got knowledge-based articles and videos. We've got just so much that isn't owned, content that isn't necessarily owned by the learning team, but we should be using that as part of how our folks learn and grow within our organization. And so how do we curate that information in such a way that it's easy to access? And then I have in here learning cluster design, because that is the next thing that we're working on as well. So learning cluster design is a new theory through and I shouldn't even say a new theory. It's basically take every adult learning theory and put them together, and how do they all work together, which was a question that I had been asking for years and years and years. And the book is called Designing for Modern Learning by Crystal Kadakia and Lisa Owens. And the thought behind it is, how do you take a learner and put that person at the center based on their persona, and then you cluster all of the assets they need for learning around them so they can access all of them in different ways. So it is excellent. We last year started reorganizing all of our learning into a more cluster-based approach, still using that 1, 2, 3 model, and we continue to do that as well. I see Katie's got the book. It is so good. So that is one plug that I will make for a resource that has really helped to solidify a lot of what we are doing. So I know we are coming up on time. I want to say thank you. I promise to continue answering questions as I can. Here is my LinkedIn. Again, I am happy to connect with folks there. That's the easiest way for me to continue to have a conversation. If you've got individual questions or you want to reach out or brainstorm together, whatever it is, and we'll go from there. So Jay, with that, I'll turn it back to you and let you wrap us up.
Well, thank you so much, Jess. Boy, I've got so much in the last 2 minutes. So I don't know which my favorite comment was, either the simple but brilliant, or I like how she makes things so simple without dumbing it down. Those were two just wonderful comments.
I like that one too.
That I saw. I did get asked if you'd be willing to share your deck in addition to
that's
the
fine.
presentation.
Sure.
So
do you want a PD? I know I had sent it to you earlier. Do you want to PDF it, or do you want me to PDF it?
We can PDF it.
Okay.
We can PDF it.
I like how we just made PDF a verb.
And also just for people who don't know, we have been trying to do more follow-up activities to all of our learning community events. So we will follow up with Jess for some questions, either on via Zoom video or via as part of our newsletter, in terms of a written communication. So we're trying to do more and more of that with all of our learning events. So stay tuned. I'm going to see with Jess, I'm not going to tell you the number, but we have an over-under on how many LinkedIn invitations she gets. And I'm expecting after this great presentation that it's going to be well over, Jess. So we'll see if I'm right or not. So thank you to Jess. Thank you to all of you for spending your day with us. We know you're busy and just appreciate that you spend time with our learning communities and with us. So with that, make it a wonderful day. And once again, can we do a clap or a thank you or keep the chat going or do a reaction of the thumbs up to Jess, and just thank you so much. So make it a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you.